Good evening, everyone. The time is 5:32 p.m. I would like to call our policy work session to order. Mr. Truesdale, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Daniels,
Here.
Ms. Davis,
Present.
Ms. Green, Mr. Jones,
Here.
Ms. Rawls, Mr. Rodriguez,
Present.
Ms. Bowers.
Present. Please note Councilwoman Rawls is excused this evening, and I believe we will be joined by Vice President Green later. Just a few comments before we begin. Our topic for tonight's policy work session is ghost guns. You may have seen a little preview on the news the other day, but it is something that was discussed during our last quarterly report for the first quarter of 2024 from the Bureau of Police. They noted the number of ghost guns that had been seized to this point. Before we begin our presentation, I wanted to see if our Public Safety Chair, Councilman Jones, had anything he wanted to say before we begin.
Thank you, President Bowers. Just basically to your points, we've seen a lot of ghost guns being confiscated in the city of Harrisburg over a period of time by the Harrisburg Police Department. And this is a growing issue in a lot of communities around Pennsylvania. So I think this is something that we can get in front of and build out an ordinance for it if possible. And reached out to Mr. Flood, Ceasefire, to give us a little presentation on some of this. So, all righty.
Okay, thank you. We're joined by Mr. Brandon Flood, who serves as the Deputy Director of Government Affairs with Ceasefire PA. Mr. Flood?
Thank you, Council President Bowers. Thank you, Council members, for your indulgence. Anyone from the community, too, thank you for your interest. So what I want to do is I'm going to kind of lay the table. This will be as formal as I'll be, and then after that, we can kind of informally do a Q&A. But before I begin my remarks, I want to say that I am a gun owner. So I'm certainly very mindful, even though I work for an organization that advocates for gun violence prevention, we also are in the business of advocating for responsible gun ownership. So I at least wanted to set the table that this policy isn't, and certainly I don't represent myself as a gun grabber. We're about responsible gun ownership, particularly in Harrisburg City. That being said, the issue of ghost guns making their way into the hands of criminals is a growing problem in our cities and for our law enforcement officials statewide or nationwide, rather. To illustrate how insidious this issue is, law enforcement agencies nationally, now give some context, in 2016 alone, there were 1,758 ghost guns that were recovered nationally by the ATF. Now that's 2016. Between the period of 2016 to 2021, we've seen that number skyrocket to close to 50,000 ghost guns that are recovered. And again, these are recovery rates that doesn't account for how many are actually in circulation that have not yet been recovered. As Councilman Jones alluded to, he talked about the unique issue, or might have been Council President Bowers who talked about the news. CBS 21 did probably was ABC 21, ABC 27, but 21 did a brief feature about Central PA, about how it's impacting Central PA, York, Harrisburg, Lancaster, and in that report they mentioned that the city of Harrisburg since 2020 recovered 51 ghost guns. Again, recovery doesn't mean doesn't represent how many are actually in circulation. So it's this kind of phenomena. This isn't just unique to the city of Harrisburg. This is happening nationally. In fact, it was this phenomenon that prompted the Biden administration and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to issue a final rule in April of 2022 that defined ghost gun kits as firearms under the law, so that government could more carefully regulate them by ensuring proper marking, record keeping, and traceability. For those of you who may not be familiar with ghost guns, and you'll hear this term used interchangeably, the real policy is unfinished firearm build kits, right? So these are kits that come I like to describe them as the IKEA of guns. You know, you purchase these pieces that are unassembled, and it allows the user, you know, especially these 80% kits, you have a partially complete kit for you to assemble, and whether you get the remaining parts from using a 3D printer or for some other means, you are able to build a functional firearm which does not have any serial numbers and cannot be traced. So that's why you hear the term ghost guns. Ghost guns, I like to say, are more so used are the ones that are being crime guns that don't have any serialization or markings that are out there floating around and aren't, you know, these aren't people that are just building guns for themselves, right? You know, because that's the one thing to bear in mind too, is this policy in no way, shape, and form prevents someone from being able to build their own gun. You know, even if there were a statewide initiative, doesn't prohibit them from doing so. You can still do so if you can lawfully possess a firearm. The difficulty becomes is if you don't have a background check for someone who's buying these pieces, you can't ascertain whether or not they are lawful or not. So that's that's what this initiative certainly is looking to address. So, you know, as I told you, you know, the rule that was issued in 2022 by the Biden administration, you know, while that was certainly a great first step forward, there weren't any additional resources allocated to federal law enforcement to enforce these rules, right? So we can make all the laws and rules and regulations we want all day long, but if we don't have the infrastructure or the just the capacity to be able to enforce these rules, you know, they're pretty much ineffective. So that's part of why what we're looking at doing is, you know, we watched what happened in the city of Philadelphia in 2021. They introduced the same ordinance. They were sued by Gun Owners of America. Ultimately, that case made it to Commonwealth Court, where the Commonwealth Court affirmed the legality and constitutionality of that ordinance. So what we want to do here is be able to equip our local officials with the ability to address these issues. I consider this to be a stopgap measure. This isn't something that we think, you know, and we'll see that later on down the line, but we also, and I talked about that case in Philadelphia, even though the Commonwealth Court affirmed that ruling, the Gun Owners of America, they appealed that case to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and that's where it's currently at. But that ordinance still remains valid in Philadelphia as we speak. Also on the national side, many of you may have seen too, you heard me talk about that Biden, or those rules that were issued by the Biden administration in 2022. That also made it to court, and currently the United States Supreme Court is going to be taking up the issue of ghost guns, hopefully sometime this year. But one of the things to be mindful of is that the Supreme Court stayed the regulations. So those regulations that were issued by the Biden administration still remain in effect until which time that the Supreme Court issues its ruling. So I know a lot of folks are going to talk about, and you guys as a municipality have experienced in the past, lawsuits. I would say in this case, certainly, if this ordinance were to be enacted, I don't foresee any challenges happening until which time that both the PA Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court issue some guidance on this stuff. So, you know, that's part of the reason why we are reaching out to municipalities. The first municipality we reached out to was the city of York. We also had that Commissioner Muldrow there, who was also in support of this initiative. You know, the city of York, and I'm sure you know Councilman Jones, is dealing with the same issues that Harrisburg is dealing with. It is our intent to go to all of our larger metropolitan areas and advance these initiatives. So our next city that's up is going to be Pittsburgh, and we're also having some conversations with Altoona. So, and in terms of what this ordinance does functionally, so all that we're asking this body to do is to introduce this ordinance so that it dictates that anyone using a 3D printer for the purposes of printing firearms or firearm parts be required to be a federal firearms licensee. I did send some handouts in advance to Jared, where it's literally a easy 10-step process to become a federal firearms licensee. So it's not certainly burdensome. Again, me as a gun owner, I've had to go through the ATF for certain certifications. So, again, it may be an inconvenience, but it certainly doesn't encroach upon one's Second Amendment rights. So that's what this ordinance would do. Again, back to what we talk about enforcement. One of the questions that come up is, how are you guys going to, if this is ultimately enacted here, how are you guys going to enforce this? So there's this is where you guys can become creative here, right? There's a number of different ways. Obviously, the first method of enforcement would be, as folks understand that this is an ordinance in this city, some greater self-regulation, right? We know that just because you make a law, not all folks follow the law, but there are some folks that operate in that gray area, right? If you're not expressly telling me what I can't do or I can do, we're going to find that loophole. So, so self-regulation is the first piece. And then task forces too, right? This allows you guys to impanel task force. And I was talking to Councilman Rodriguez earlier outside, whether you're creating a new task force or you're adding a different facet to an existing task force, right? So you guys have the parent task force that was recently created. You heard me talk about that CBS 21 interview that happened. They said one of the biggest targets that law enforcement are focusing their energy on are young people. Young people are accessing these guns because you can literally buy these unfinished firearm build kits online. For any of you that have children, you know that they have access to credit cards. My son, my 12-year-old, has credit cards and Cash App cards and the like. So they said that was the target population. And if and I have colleagues that work in the juvenile justice system where they've had kind of these feedback sessions, and when they would ask them, "Where are you guys getting these guns from?" They say, "You can buy them online, right? People are buying them online." So these task force will be certainly helpful in enforcing and being able to focus in on these type of weapons, even if it is parents, right? Parents being more vigilant in the homes, right? You see these kids, you might see a part of a gun that may resemble a toy gun, right? So there's stuff that can be done on the task force side, and then information campaigns, right? Whether that's I know, and often you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know how many gun dealers, now there might be FFLs in the city that may operate from their basement, but how many actual gun stores you have in Harrisburg City? I don't think there is any that are there, maybe on the outside, like Lower Paxton and the like. So information campaigns, I say that to say is that people understand, hey, this is an ordinance. Again, you help educate someone so that they can self-regulate. So if you are engaging stores or folks that operate in that way, one other thing that makes Harrisburg very unique is that you guys have the farm show, which they usually have those very big outdoor shows, right? Where you have a lot of these, well, I won't necessarily say ghost guns, but all types of weapons are being sold. So, and it certainly brings a very robust crowd here. The farm show is situated in the city. So again, this makes it an even greater incentive for the city to enact this ordinance, and again, in a stopgap matter, be able to address this while we wait for the high court, both on the state and the U.S. Supreme Court, to act on this stuff. And then too, just see something, just like for those of you that take the train or the airplane, to see something, say something campaign, same type of deal, right? In a perfect world, we would love to be able to allocate salaries for people to be focused on this and enforce this, but we have to be creative and use the resources we have, and more importantly, especially if we're talking about our youth, engage our parents and ask them to be accountable to themselves and be more vigilant. So I'm going to put a pause right there, and I will open it up for any questions that anyone may have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Flood. Just for me, you answered a lot of the questions that I was going to have for you, for the viewers and some people in the audience to actually hear those things. But one of the things that you said is one of my biggest concerns is our youth. As the commissioners here, him and I had a conversation earlier, and just looking at the numbers of incidents with our youth and juveniles, and and a lot of them are getting into this. Just like you said, it's easily accessible to them, and that would be the concern for me. And I would hope that we would do a lot of education. I would intend to do a lot of education around making the parents and the community aware of these. I'm sure they heard of them, but again, just looking at how easily they are assessed by using online. We looked them up. You can purchase these kits for about $20, all the way up to AR-15s, and those seem to be a problem. They wanted to try to discontinue them or make them not to assault rifle, because right now they're not considered an assault rifle. That's what makes them easily accessible. So my concern would be for the youth in our community get easily assessing these things, not being licensed, and they're just not able to trace them. So that's one of my biggest concerns. And you spoke on the point of what enforcement would look like, and I think we could find a creative way to again add some focus, again, because there are task force that our police force already have out there. They already have gang units and things of that nature. I don't know what it would look like to add that item to the agenda, for you guys, but that is something that I would definitely be considering to do, and also just making sure that the community is informed as much as possible about this. So with that, it seemed like you wanted to respond.
Yeah. So two things. Number one, mentioning the Biden administration, one of the things that they did probably maybe the last 3 months is they reached out to all school districts, administrators for all school districts to teach, to get them to engage the student body and parents about the safe storage of firearms, right? A lot of parents, a lot of kids live in homes where the parents do have firearms that may not be properly stored. So the same thing can have the same kind of dynamic when it comes to the ghost guns, right? Engaging even the school district in any campaigns that they may already have in conjunction with what's happening with the Biden administration. And then I also want to mention too, I didn't necessarily go into the Commonwealth Court, the rationale for the Commonwealth Court's reasoning for affirming the City of Philadelphia's ordinance. So in Pennsylvania, they have what's known as a statewide preemption statute that dictates how firearms, the possession of firearms, even ammunition, are regulated. Essentially, it says that the state is to be the entity that dictates the regulation thereof. So it doesn't allow municipalities to do so. So you guys have seen in the past with, I think, the public discharge ordinance in the past, same thing with York. But what's unique in this case is that these kits are, these guns are, they're disassembled, right? So they're not a complete firearm. So because they are in parts, they do not constitute a gun and thus aren't subject to that state preemption statute. So that was kind of the workaround for that ordinance, and from what I'm told from the attorneys from Philadelphia, that was deliberate, in advancing this ordinance. So this opens the door for cities. If in the past you couldn't do anything about any firearms, this gives localities more agency to be able to do something. Again, in a stopgap measure, in a stopgap way, until which time now either the Pennsylvania General Assembly does something broadly on this, or until we see what the U.S. Supreme Court dictates.
So one of the things that you mentioned too, with this ordinance out of Philadelphia, being a first-class city, and you said that we would have freedom. So is that just working with our solicitor and making sure that it's formulated the right that we can, I guess, formulate it into a third-class city ordinance?
Yeah, I'm going to start with I don't know the answer to that. We have to find a way to make it fall into the enumerated powers. Philly will be a very good example. They have a different structure than us, and they have more constitutional freedoms than third-class cities do. But it's going to take a little bit of thought, whether what is the enforcement mechanism? Because that's really the challenging part. Is it possession of a ghost gun? Is it possession of a 3D printer? Is it the printing of a program that isn't those things are going to take a little bit of thought. Right. What is it you're trying to nip in the bud?
Exactly.
Right. And
go ahead.
Right. So that's going to take a little nuance to dig into. I believe the issue about disassembled parts is a helpful one. I don't know what the U.S. or state Supreme Court is going to do, but I think they're both going to make decisions that may or may not match up. Mm-hmm. As far as I'm aware, there are 3 other gun matters pending in front of the state Supreme Court right now. And our gun case from 2015, we were back in court yesterday at just another motion, another argument, still in the county court. It's been up and down and up and down. So, you know, I think you have to go into this expecting someone will challenge it.
Absolutely.
There's ways to manage that as well on the front end, including when you make it effective.
Right, and
So-
I had a conversation as well, you know, again with our commissioner, and one of the things that you know, as an ordinance, if they grab someone with and then they send this over to the DJ's office, it could be a concern that it gets kicked from there. So I think one of the other steps for me to do is to have a conversation with the president judge and also the district attorney, you know, to make sure that we're on the same page if this ordinance is, and that can help with some of the enforcement, in my opinion.
And I think the district attorney is going to be a critical person to have involved, chief law enforcement for the county. Their view of this is going to matter.
Well, I've already had conversations with District Attorney Chardo, and he said he would love to see you know, some a resolution or ordinance for this, you know. And again, I know a lot of it's dependent on what happens on the federal level, but as it stands, it seems to be a way that we can put something on the books. And again, like you said, strategically and crafting this to fit, you know, in a way. And one of the things for me to see is, again, just not, I still don't think that it would stop them from being able to access, but long as there's some type of penalty behind it. You know, there already is, but you know, these young kids being able to get these guns, we need a way to deter them from utilizing guns, period, but especially ghost guns. They're a growing concern, like you said, across the nation.
Yeah, I think ghost guns, just thinking it through, the concern is, and this is why we talked about the manufacturing on a printer. We're not as, it sounds, it's not as much as against the possession of it,
That's
right?
correct.
It's against stopping the flow of it happening in the first place, which is the big challenge.
And without it being tracked, again, like you said, we all have a right to bear arms if you can legally do so.
Yes, and,
Right.
Right, and so, but we're trying to get to manufacturers that may or may not be in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
Right, that's the
Absolutely.
That's the,
So again, is that the part of the case that happened for the Eastern District where they stopped the sell of it for at least 4 years or something?
Well,
like that?
yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that too. So that's another enforcement mechanism too. I gave you guys, I enumerated a few, but what the city of Philadelphia did is that they actually sued two of the largest. Now, I'm not saying that's what Harrisburg has to do, but you know, I'm gonna let you guys decide that. But what they did was they sued two of the largest ghost gun kit makers in the country, Polymer 80 as well as JSD Supply. What you reference is Polymer 80. They came to a mutual agreement with the city. They will no longer be selling any kits. This is Polymer 80 in Philadelphia and surrounding counties for 4 years. And then JSD Supply won't be selling products for 4 years. And that's statewide. So, you know, these are things that's another if you want to look at another method of enforcement, again, it's an opportunity to be creative about how to do that. To Neil's point too, this ordinance would not be, would not penalize someone for merely possessing a 3D printer. Obviously, it's the intent of what you do with the printer, because you can make a lot of things with 3D printers, not just firearms. So no, it wouldn't.
So real fast, Neil, this may be a question for you. So with the ban of those sales for that that amount of time, 4 years in the state of Pennsylvania, correct? So they would no longer ship those things to this area right now.
New
That's
Jersey,
what
Maryland, them sipping in. I mean,
so my point, so that's what I'm saying. I think something else comes out of that. Now it becomes trafficking. It becomes something else.
Polymer 80, their prohibition applies to surrounding counties and surrounding states. So your surrounding state, but again, it's a finite period, 4 years.
4 years, yeah.
And again, this was something that they brokered themselves. Again, part of just having that conversation, maybe not have to necessarily lead to litigation, but having a conversation, engaging those manufacturers. Obviously, these are the two largest. There's a lot of outfitters that make these products available or that you can purchase them from. And then to the thing that Neil had mentioned about an effective date, right? One of the things is, obviously in a perfect world, we would want to wait to see what happens on the state level or happens on the U.S. With the Supreme Court. But we never know when that will happen, right? So again, this kind of goes back to what I mentioned about utilizing this as a stopgap measure, right? So kind of temporarily, even if that's built into the language of the ordinance, to Neil's point, when that effective date would it be effective at,
Right.
here, or or even say when it sunsets, or the repeal, right, may be contingent upon X, Y, and Z. So it gives you guys some flexibility. And again, this is meant to be a stopgap measure. Part of what our organization does, my primarily lobby the state. So we do have House Bill 777, which is a anti-ghost gun bill, and that bill is a little bit different. It just addresses the issue of serialization, just requiring that these kits have serial numbers, and that there be a penalty for people attempting to purchase these kits that don't have serial numbers, and then conversely for dealers or sellers that are knowingly selling these kits that they are not serialized. So, and again, to be frank with you, and I said the same thing to York City Council, is I'm pretty confident that the Senate will not take up the bill did make it out of the House. It's in the Senate chamber. I'm pretty confident that the Senate Majority Leader, Joe Pittman, will not have this run. So, you won't see that bill passed out this session or probably the subsequent session either. So again, this kind of goes back to what can we do locally in the meantime until the state or the federal government gets their shit together.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? Do you mind?
Go ahead.
So I'm trying to understand the partial kit. Can I basically buy the partial kit, do part of it online and the rest of it online too? Like how do I complete the project if I'm the purchaser?
So you could do that, or this goes back to the 3D printer, or you can 3D print what else you need, right? And again, the difficulty is, again, we talk about, and I always preface this, is that doesn't stop people who can lawfully own a firearm from, because there's people that do this as a hobby, as a pastime, right? And they're very enthusiasts when it comes to this. So, the difficulty is being able to ascertain whether someone's a prohibited purchaser at the time of them purchasing these kits, and trying to be proactive versus find out after the fact, oh, this person was prohibited,
But I'm assuming the kits, by being incomplete, gets around all kinds of laws.
Listen,
because they're
by the
But I
percentages.
guess if I'm selling both halves of the kit, I'm really selling the whole thing.
right. And actually what happened, what we've seen happen too, is when the Biden administration issued those rules on ghost guns in 2022, is it expressly focused in on 80% kit. So all the manufacturers did was say, well, it's lower, it make it 70% kit, right? 79% kit, So, we kind of, is, we're operating, again, there's a lot of people that operate in that gray area, and two, it's a lucrative business, right? If I know that I'm prohibited from purchasing a firearm and I can find a workaround way that technically is not legal, and I know there's a demand for it, that's why you see some of this pushback, because there's an industry for it. It's not that folks feel like, hey, we should have freedom to these guns. This is also an economic driver too for a lot of these manufacturers and sellers.
Okay, so that'll be all the questions for me at this moment, and I'll open it up for my colleagues and go to my immediate right, and Councilman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair Jones. Thank you, Brandon or Mr. Flood, for joining us this evening. Like you said, 79% with a direct link to the other 21, right? So it's like, damn if you do, damn if you don't. Scariest part about it is they can make the entire gun from the 3D printer too, right? They don't even need the partial parts. And that's getting past metal detection. That's getting past a lot of things that we use for our safety and that our law enforcement use for our safety daily. So it's horrifying. I'm glad you gentlemen are bringing it up, and I'm glad council gets to work on this, because it's something I've questioned for a while. In larger municipalities, it's a huge issue. And I think from the federal standpoint, to go after perhaps the software, or the same way they get red flags on IP addresses when certain things are downloaded, perhaps, we can do the same thing, but I know it would have to happen from a federal level and then with the manufacturer directly. So
Yeah, I mean, serialization of these parts would be ideal,
Right.
would be great, right? And same thing for the 3D printers. At least it is my understanding and to my knowledge that you do not have to be. Matter of fact, there's a bill actually in the state. Like I'm drawing a blank on the bill, but it has to do with 3D printers. Basically saying that hey, you have to become a federally firearms licensee before you can be able to purchase one of these. Now, again, you can use this 3D printers for different reasons. So that's kind of the issue there is that hey, listen, we certainly know there are people that are utilizing this technology and given the current legal landscape are doing it for a good recreational reason or not for non criminal reasons. But we have to look at public safety as a whole, right? So just because, and this is an arbitrary number, just because 25% of the people are doing the right thing and utilizing this process,
75%,
we have to be. And again, and this kind of goes back to what you mentioned about Fran too. So I should also mention is DA Chartle is also in the Pennsylvania DA's Association. They also publicly supported House Bill 777. So this is even something in their executive board. For any of you that know about the Pennsylvania District Attorneys Association, they're not a liberal group of folks, right? These are mostly Republicans, and some in many rural areas that also see the issue.
Director Flood, real quick, and I could just be spitballing here, but would you consider if we, let's say pie in the sky, we were able to draft something, get it, implemented tomorrow, would you consider, or if you were able to draft it with us, should the consideration for a ghost gun and the penalty be much higher than being caught with like an illegal firearm? Because at least with a legal firearm, the person who obtained it legally, purchased it how they should have, unless it's a street purchase. But yeah, with a ghost gun, your complete intention is to do the wrong thing.
Well, one of the things Lamont talked about was the third class city code and and even first class code in terms of being able to have the flexibility to institute those penalties. That's why you see in this bill it's fine based. So in a perfect world, yes, we will want to, but I think there are some legal constraints for us to be able.
Well, just in a perfect world,
would you say? But hell yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's why I said pie in the sky. Trust me, I get the red tape, but pie in the sky.
But that's a good question, though, because for anyone that may read the bill or say, well, why doesn't it do more, right?
Right.
And, that we were mindful of that. And again, too, for Philadelphia, because someone from York City Council said, if you see the ordinance that was given to you guys, it is literally verbatim with a couple things that we X'd out to be applicable to you guys' code, right? And the reason why we did that, it was a heckler at the hearing is like, yeah, you guys did it verbatim. You didn't have and for me, I said, well, listen, we're looking at the legal ramifications, right? So if they upheld this ordinance specifically with this specific text, what's the saying goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So, just in case that comes up too. But yeah, that's a good point to make in a perfect world, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, because ideally, if I'm a bad doer, I can get this ghost gun into whatever establishment I want and have a full magazine in the back waiting for me, if I'm the bad doer, right? And most of these are like a carbon or a plastic, right, that the 3D printer. So yeah, it's just unfortunate, but yeah, I'd love to see how we can move this forward. Thank you.
The initial defenses that were coming up before they started the regulation of the federal side was First Amendment oriented.
Right.
I am just writing programming. I am just selling an idea, which is a hard fight to have.
Right.
I mean, it's, as opposed to they weren't actually doing the manufacturing of it. They weren't printing them. They weren't doing anything. And so it is a hard thing to get around. And, but.
And I know you wouldn't have the answers for this, Neil, but what if it is like with the ATF, if it was regulated kind of like tobacco, you have to be a certain age to even be able to make the purchase.
We have to look at all that, right? Because there is a final rule that's come out. I will bet you there's other rules from other agencies percolating, and I think we want to stay in line with them.
Absolutely.
And enhance them, with what we're doing.
Yeah.
But hopefully they've drawn some lines that we can follow.
Thank you. No further sentiments, Chair Jones.
All right. Thank you, Councilman Rodriguez. President Powers.
Thank you. I'm going to rewind just a little bit because viewers who are watching on Channel 20 may have missed some of your comments in the very beginning.
gotta be
It
punctual.
is being recorded on YouTube, so anybody can go back to review. So I'm just going to rewind just a little bit to provide some context if somebody is just now turning on the television. So we're joined by Mr. Brandon Flood, Deputy Director of Government Affairs with Ceasefire Pennsylvania, and we are in the midst of a conversation about ghost guns. So could you define a ghost gun again, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, welcome, guys. For those of you that have come they're a little tardy, we appreciate you nonetheless. So for those of you that don't know what ghost guns are, so what we're talking about today are unfinished firearm build kits, which are, have existed for quite some time. But what the issue is that now you have these unfinished kits that do not have any markings, there's no record keeping, or there are no serial numbers on these kits. You heard me mention they're unfinished, or they're partially built. You don't have to undergo a background check. You can literally purchase it online. They don't ask about it. I mean, they might ask about age, but obviously there may be ways to be able to skirt past that. I haven't gone. Now I've put the ghost gun in my cart online with doing my own, but I haven't gone all the way through to see what exactly that entails. But that's what the issue is, and obviously the rampancy of these weapons. That again, accessibility is key. So again, if you can purchase this, it's almost like DoorDash, right? If I can get DoorDashed 80% of a firearm and be able to use a 3D printer or some other means to complete the rest, and I know that I'm a prohibited purchaser, that I'm not legal, that it's not legal for me to own or possess a firearm. That's the workaround, right? And in the context of the city of in the city of Harrisburg, at least some of the numbers the preliminary numbers that were provided by Harrisburg Police is that I believe since 2020 or 2021, so 51 ghost guns have been recovered in the city. Again, that's recovered, and that doesn't necessarily mean how many are actually circulating and have not yet been recovered. So, for us, obviously, one of the big things we hear from this community is, we try to prevent violence as much as we can, especially gun violence. But it's a tough job to be able to do that, right? So when we hear people talk about the rate of these unsolved homicides, right? One driver of that is having guns that are untraceable, that are used in these offenses. So essentially what we're looking to do here is to lobby Harrisburg City Council to institute an ordinance if folks are going to be either purchasing or selling these weapons, that they become a federally firearms licensee before doing so, so that there is some accountability, so we know the folks that are purchasing these items are lawful and to be able to possess and use these.
Thank you. Would you mind sharing some of the statistics that were outlined in your talking points, just to further frame the issue and the significance? We're not unique to this issue within the Commonwealth?
Yeah, as Council President Bowers had just mentioned, Harrisburg is not unique to this issue. We're actually going municipality. Well, we're starting off with some of the larger municipalities to advance this very same initiative. We started with York, Harrisburg's next, and then Pittsburgh and Altoona and others. But to give some context about this, about how great of an issue this is in 2016, and this is something too that the commissioner can attest to too, is a lot of law enforcement agencies weren't even capturing information about ghost guns prior to 2020. So a lot of them are just now are just now tracking those firearms. But in 2016, there were about 1,800 ghost guns nationally that were recovered by law enforcement. Between 2016 and 2021, it was over 45,000 ghost guns have been recovered. And again, this is a recovery rate, doesn't mean how many are actually in circulation. I talked about, you heard me talk about York. York in 2023, they had 20 ghost guns that were recovered, right? And we have a couple of right to know requests for a lot of different police departments to get a greater sense of that, because even when we went to the state police to get an ideal number of how many of these guns were recovered, they couldn't necessarily give us provide us with an accurate number, because they said a lot of these law enforcement agencies, they're not as diligent with reporting these numbers, right? So They gave us same thing with the Attorney General's office. So you have different agencies that are seizing these guns. So this is a very this is a rampant issue, and certainly one of the things that was mentioned in a recent report by CBS 21 was that not only is this an issue generally, but it's more pronounced when it comes to our youth that are in possession of these weapons. So that's kind of the target population of folks are becoming, and word travels around again, so people know. And then you have some people that are just in the business. I may not be a gun dealer or a FFL, but I know that if I buy this ghost gun kit for $400, I can sell it to Johnny for $600, right? So you have those kind of things happening. So this ordinance, we at least want to make a dent to whatever extent that we could in Harrisburg City.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
All right.
Thank
Council,
you. Okay,
Councilwoman
thank you.
Davis.
Thank you, Chair Jones. And Mr. Flood, thank you for being here this evening and presenting and educating us. I'm sure there are a lot of people in the city, everywhere, who don't know much about ghost guns, because I learned a lot this evening from your presentation. And so until these bills and ordinances are passed, you've given us some information about how local municipalities and parents in the community can actually educate themselves. Are there any flyers out right now in the community? Have you created one? And if not, what are your plans for?
No, that's a great question. So in terms of from an educational standpoint, so for those of you here and those that are watching, if you go to Councilwoman, or Vice President rather, no, I haven't seen you since the promotion. So for those of you who are watching, so to your point, if you go to our website, www.ceasefire.pa, we have a clearinghouse full of information about each one of our policies, whether we're talking about ghost guns, lost and stolen, safe storage, etc. So we do have a clearinghouse full of information there for you to find that. But this would be, if this ordinance is passed, this would be a great opportunity for us to partner with you guys and develop such flyer and such outreach initiatives. And I would be right there with my ceasefire pen, making sure that we're handing these out to folks that and making sure that they get it. For those that are green, making sure we're sending them to them electronically. So we have not done so in a campaign type fashion, but from an informational standpoint. And I also use this as a shameless plug. May 7th, Ceasefire PA, especially for those of you who are local here, we're going to have our advocacy day at the Capitol. Right, so with over 500 folks, you'll see them donning the orange shirts. Again, so we give them materials. They get those materials that are on our websites that include frequently asked questions, general talking points, and just general information about policy X, Y, and Z.
Thank you very much. No further questions.
All right. Councilwoman Daniels.
Thank you for the presentation. So I just have a lot of logistical questions. So if someone is in Pennsylvania and they order the stuff online, what we're suggesting is that they get the federal license, and that would make their order a lawful order.
So yeah, if a gun is going to be sold to a resident of Harrisburg, this would apply to anyone who's either selling or buying. So if you're purchasing as a Harrisburg resident, or if you are a dealer, presumably FFL, or if you're obviously you can say people who you heard me use the example. There are people who aren't licensed that are selling, but in the context of a gun dealer, that whether they're in Harrisburg or outside of it, if you're selling to a Harrisburg resident, then that would apply. But to your point, I'm sure your follow-up point would be is how will we be able to ascertain that online sale from a dealer that may not be in Harrisburg, or in Harrisburg for that matter, that transaction ain't happening. That's the difficult part where I say you have to kind of be a little creative, especially if we're talking about young people, even if it's looking at your monthly statements, right, and seeing what things are coming off. And obviously, some of those transactions don't necessarily are very clear in what exactly was purchased. So, but yeah, that's how that scenario would work.
So, can you explain the differences in the requirements from a Pennsylvania license and a federal license?
Yeah, so a Pennsylvania license, you're probably talking about what's known as a concealed carry permit. That's distinct from the federal. So this would essentially, if you are a FFL, a federally firearms licensee, you would be able to operate as a dealer. So you have some folks like your what is that, Cabela's, or what is the one out there with the East Mall?
Bass Pro.
Bass Pro. So you have your big folks like Bass Pro, but you also have folks that are, they call them what do they call them? Kitchen table FFLs, right? Where you have folks that are licensed to sell firearms, but are doing it out of a residential residence, right? Or maybe in the basement of their mom's house doing so. So the distinction between becoming an FFL and what you're talking about would be your ability to carry a firearm in a concealed manner in Pennsylvania. So that would be the distinction.
So someone with an FFL license, they can also sell, not just
Correct.
it's not just to carry.
Yes.
Okay. And then, so could someone not have a Pennsylvania license but get the FFL license just for the sake of bypassing Pennsylvania rules?
What was the first part? You said, so if someone, yeah,
So like,
state
could
that.
someone in Pennsylvania who would want to own a gun, but let's say there's some reason they can't get one in a Pennsylvania license, would they be able to get the FFL license?
No, I mean, if you can't get a concealed carry permit, you're not going to be able to get the FFL. And the FFL would be, I'm sure, a higher standard than currently. If you're getting a concealed carry permit, you just go to the sheriff's office. The sheriff sends it to the state police, the PICS check, and they usually tell you pretty quickly, depending upon the volume of requests. Whereas with a federal firearms licensee, you're dealing with there's a lot of other barriers and a lot of other a greater degree of vetting by a federal agency. So yeah, it would be a higher bar. So if you can't get the concealed carry permit, then you're not going to be able to pass muster for a FFL.
Okay. And then if you're someone who, let's say you're an Ohio resident and you have an Ohio license, I think those folks have to get a visitor's license when they come into PA, right? If they're going to carry.
Depends on the reciprocity agreement. Admittedly, I know it differs by state. So you use the example of Ohio. So I would have to take a look at what their reciprocity rules are, if there is any reciprocity rules between.
And if there isn't, then they're not allowed to bring, or.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I would have to look, because even the reciprocity agreements, some of them are, depending on the state, they're not the same. You don't get carte blanche as if you have the same rights in your state. Some are a little bit limited, so it would vary by state. I would assume, Neil, unless you know something different.
I know if you're transporting a firearm over state lines, you better know what you're doing.
Right.
So can someone who has a license in Ohio kind of use that FFL license to then not have to deal with Pennsylvania rules for,
Well,
I don't know, let's say you're.
yeah, I mean, and that's part of being specific and having specificity in the ordinance. If I'm not mistaken, it should
So
outline that Pennsylvania.
is the theory then going to turn every buyer in Harrisburg into a seller automatically? Is that what, because they're going to have a federal firearms license? Yeah, if they have to have one to buy it, suddenly we have 1,000 sellers.
Well, you might. Here's the thing: you might already have 1,000 sellers now, just operating, under cloak and dagger. So, and again, there's some folks that, and too, we've seen with even go back to the Biden administration with the universal background. They issued rules around universal background checks. So it's breaking out the distinction between someone who, I may just have a gun that I'm not in the business of selling, right? So they're making a distinction. If you are in the business of selling versus, hey, I'm selling this one-off firearm to Neil because I no longer have a use for this. It doesn't mean that I'm in the business of selling, but I'm selling this gun to Neil just because I'm offloading or otherwise. So there, and again, I'm sure that's going to be something that will be dictated by the U.S. Supreme Court, even when it comes to selling. But yeah, but I say all that to say is you have some folks that are operating out of their homes and may sell less than 20 guns a year. And I'll give you an example. We actually have another piece of legislation that has to deal with electronic records of sale of firearms. The way it works in PA now is if I sell or transfer a firearm and I'm the dealer, I'm supposed to keep record of that, and I send the paper form to the state police, right? But the issue with that is 2024 for starters, so we still send in paper forms, and then you have the state police that have this huge administrative backlog. So being able to trace a gun, it may take 6 months for the state police to process this form, and by the time a dozen crimes could have already been committed, and we don't have the ability to trace those firearms. So, I think that to Neil's point is we'll hopefully have a lot more guidance that dictates how we address this in Pennsylvania. But in the meantime, and to your point too, there are going to be some things that will be novel that we have to kind of be a little agile with. But again, this is meant to be a stopgap until which time the state and the feds get a handle on this.
And that's it for me. Thank you.
Great questions, though. And two, I would use this as an opportunity too, because I know there's a lot of new gun owners too, again, speaking to our mission of promoting responsible gun ownership in particular. I know we've seen during the pandemic an increase in gun ownership, in particular when it comes to Black and brown women too. So to Neil's point, especially for those of you that are traveling, I know we're close to Baltimore and Maryland, 2 different jurisdictions. You can go to the Attorney General's website. They have some apps too where you can be able to see what the rules are in other states in terms of how you transport that weapon and if there are reciprocity agreements between the states. That's something too that I have to be mindful of.
Okay, thank you. I will now turn to Vice President Green and see if she would have any questions for you.
Thank you, Councilman Jones. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Flood. I don't have many questions. I guess I'm just trying to understand the overall logistics of the tracking itself, right? So by putting serial numbers on the kits, it allows us to know who originally bought the kit, i.e. who we would say originally makes the ghost gun?
Right. Well, now, to be clear, so for this ordinance, we wouldn't be dictating the serialization. I mean, in the perfect world we would, but I think the point you're getting to, it would be a hell of a difficulty to dictate to people to do that, and then more importantly, ensure that they did that. But statewide, that is what our goal is to your point, to be able to not only trace who purchased the gun, but where the gun, the source, where it was sourced from as well.
Okay.
This here would merely say, if you're going to be in the business of purchasing an unfinished firearm build kit or selling a finished firearm build kit, aka ghost gun, that you would have to obtain that federal firearms license. And again, kind of part of what this issue is because, as the example I used earlier, there's nothing that stops me today from purchasing 10 ghost gun kits for $300 and obviously I'm selling them illegally, but selling them to someone at a marked up price with no accountability whatsoever. So the goal is to at least have a greater degree of accountability and ensure that the people that are taking possession of these weapons and more importantly selling these weapons are lawful and that those transactions are lawful.
Okay. And as far as enforcement, how do we enforce making for sure that people have that federal firearms license?
Yeah, great questions. So as I said, obviously that's always the question when it comes to especially public safety issues or anything relative to dealing with the crimes code is enforcement. So in this case, I said there's a few different methods and, and this is where the community and law enforcement can be creative, especially you guys with the Law Enforcement Advisory Committee. That's the thing, right? so especially with entities like that, you guys can. So with entities like that, you guys can be, can be creative. One of the things I said is obviously, self-regulation. Obviously we know when a law, people know for people that operate in the gray area, say, hey, listen, this doesn't expressly say that I can't do this. It doesn't expressly say that I can do this. This is where people are finding that sweet spot and taking advantage of it. So self-regulation, people just knowing, hey, this is a thing now here. We have to be on our toes. So that would be the first. I talked about the impaneling of a task force that can be specific to this, or you can build upon existing task force. I mentioned about the parent task force. You know, especially if kids are, we're seeing youth, they tend to be the ones that are caught with possession of these weapons. So having parents be more vigilant, you know, so you can use these task forces or do something with the DA's office and really be inventive. And then, you know, to Councilwoman Davis's point, we talked about information campaigns, right? You know, just like for a lot of folks here today and those are viewing, and even some of my colleagues when I talk about ghost guns, you know, especially for my apolitical friends, you know, they have no clue about this, right? So the more educated they are, they're able to see things in the home, especially if you see these parts of guns that may resemble like a gun, like a toy or something. And then too, we talked about, you know, everyone, for the most part, if you got a kid that's over 12, they usually have some kind of card or whatever, especially for Roblox or whatever y'all be giving these cards for. So even having parents be vigilant about the bank statements, right? You know, seeing exactly what this transaction is. So, and then we also talked about, lastly, Philadelphia sued two of the largest ghost gun kit makers, and we're able to broker an agreement where they're going to at least stop selling those kits in Philadelphia for a finite period. So those are some of the ways to be able to enforce it. Obviously,
And to add, you know, one of the other things that I would be trying to do is to sit with the president judge to bring in the DJs. You know, because sometimes, you know, just like with codes, sometimes these ordinances and citations and things get kicked over to the DJ's office and they end up getting kicked out. So we just want to make sure that we're in clear communication with them as well. And one of the biggest things is educating the community about it. So that's one of the other pieces to the enforcement.
And one other piece too, because it's undervalued, is I talked about sort of like what Amtrak does with the see something, say something, you know, promoting a healthy form of snitching these days, right? You know, whether that's some kind of platform for kids, you know, if you see something, you know, to be able to have a mechanism to report that, hey, I've seen this or I've heard this. I know as someone in a past life, they share new guns like they share sneakers or a new, album, right? So they're very anxious to share that information. So a lot of people, so I've said this before, people know who have the gun. A lot of community people know who have the guns, especially illegally. So, you know, that kind of goes back to being able to do a specific campaign. And again, you know, this isn't going to be a panacea to the issue here, but at least you guys have some degree of flexibility, at least currently, to be more proactive and hands-on around a firearm safety issue where under the current state preemption statute, you guys haven't been in years past.
Thank you very much. I think that wraps up the questions I had. I will just say to your one point about CLEAC, the Harrisburg City Council has made the appointments to CLEAC, and they're ready to get that rolling. I know the administration said they are having trouble filling their positions. So if you know anyone that might be interested in joining the board, I would ask that you pass that information on to us or the administration so we can get that up and rolling. And then just apologize for my tardiness. I was at a community meeting, so thank you.
No, I think I know a guy or two. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think those areas is South Side and Allison Hill. Correct? Okay. Yeah, so reach out to those guys.
Sure thing.
Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Flood, Director Flood?
Not a question, just a statement.
Sure.
So according to the usconcealedcarry.com, when you get a carrier's permit, there is 1.5 million license issued with a 12 million state population. 29 states honor a PA carrier's license with the minimum age of 21. 32 are reciprocating states of that. So just to answer whoever had those questions. And once again, that's usconcealedcarry.com for anyone that wants to dig deeper on that. Thank you.
Again, we're not here, especially for our Republicans in the city, or just for folks that aren't about firearm safety legislation, is that this effort in no way seeks to impede your ability, if you can lawfully own and possess a firearm, to build your own firearm. We certainly promote responsible gun ownership here. So yeah, just wanted to emphasize that.
All right. So thank you for your presentation, and regardless how this goes, I definitely will be working closely with you to try to get this information out to our community. I think it's something that's very important, especially I think this is something that the parent task force should latch on to, because just getting our parents more aware of the actions of our youth, if they aren't already, but we are here to assist in that as well. So I appreciate you for coming out this evening.
Yeah, thank you all for your indulgence.
And I'll send you that June date too, Deputy Director. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final thoughts from Solicitor Grover on behalf of the administration?
No, we're happy to work with the council to formulate something that is workable. We did speak to the mayor, who was in favor of such a piece of legislation as long as it complies with what the proposed federal regulations are and doesn't bring those into challenge in any way. Right.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time and attention this evening. The time is 6:32 p.m. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.